Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 862A, and today's date is January 8th, 2016, and the title of this episode is The Entire U.S. Economy is Now Signaling an Economic Collapse. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. Now, the job numbers were released today, and lo and behold, the job numbers are incredible. December print of about 292,000, completely smashed expectations of 200,000, surging from last month's upward revised 252,000. And we can see right now that everyone is sitting out there, the corporate media, the U.S. government, saying, oh my God, we are moving towards full employment. Everything looks great, and it looks like at this point the unemployment rate is steady at 5%, but they are paving the way to bring down the unemployment rate to 4.9% or 4.8%. You can see it when you look at what they're trying to do here. They're trying to show that everything is absolutely fine. Now, while the unemployment is continually rising, even though they're telling us it's falling, wages simply did not grow at all. Wall Street expected a 0.2% increase in average hourly wages. In December, not only was there no wage growth, but in fact, average hourly earnings posted on a tiny decline was from $25.25 to $25.24. And the question is, when we think about this, why are wages continually declining? And if we think about this for a second, think about all those people that are working for those major corporations which we mentioned in 2015, IBM, Sony, all the retail manufacturers, the energy sector. They're leaving their jobs, which were full-time jobs making good salaries, and now they need to go out and get a part-time job, or a lot of these people can't find jobs whatsoever, which means the average salary wage is going to go down. And this is what we've been seeing. This is the trend we have been seeing. And right now, when we look through the headline information about how great the employment numbers are, we start to realize what the BLS is doing. And we mentioned this many times before, but we're starting to get confirmation of all this, just like the housing data, where we got confirmation that they've been calculating all the data for the last 10 years with manipulated, erroneous information, and they revised everything. Well, it's the same with the BLS and the GDP and every single piece of statistical information that the government puts out. And when we look at it, we see the ECRI has an interesting study out today that pretty much confirms that Obamacare has boosted part-time employment at the expense of full-time jobs. So what does this really mean? Well, we've heard this when Obamacare was coming out, that a lot of companies were saying, okay, we're going to have to cut your hours. You cannot be full-time. We have to make you part-time. You have to be under a certain number of hours. I think it was 29 hours or so. And this time we have more part-time people. But as more and more people lose their jobs, they're getting 1, 2, 3 part-time jobs just to make up what they had before. And they're not even making the same amount of money, but they need it to survive, because you have to remember, when you lose a job, you still have the same bills, the car payment, you have the rent or the mortgage, you have food that you need to purchase, you have clothing that you need to purchase, and you have to keep your utilities on. I mean, of course, some things are going to be let go, but you need funds to keep the main things operational. And what we're seeing is that these people who have lost their jobs, and remember, if we look at Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, going back to June of 2014 to the end of 2015, almost 1 million people were laid off. And we are seeing that multiple job holders rose to an 11-month high, while year-on-year growth in single job holders eased to a 3-month low. So that's very interesting. And what we're seeing right now is that those people who had full-time jobs now have multiple jobs. And what does the BLS do? They are now double counting the part-time jobs. Now, we knew this from before. We mentioned this before, but we have confirmation that the BLS is actually doing this. But they're not just counting 1 or 2 part-time jobs. If you have 3, they will count it 3 times. And they'll say these are 3 full-time jobs. This is what they're doing at this point. And what we're seeing is that as they tell us, the job numbers surged to this incredible number of 292,000, which smashed expectations. If they just doubled their count, is this number true? If they tripled their count, what does this tell us of what the economy is doing? The economy is a lot worse then. It means that, there's 130,000 jobs added, maybe 90,000 jobs that are added. And what we're seeing is that in December, there were 36,900 minimum wage waiters and bartenders that were added to the labor force, bringing the total number of minimum wage workers to 11.3 million. 11.3 million people. Now, putting this all into context, we see that waiters and bartenders in 2015 versus high-paying manufacturers are completely opposite. We see manufacturing is declining, and waiters and bartenders are declining. Right now, we have 1.6 million waiters and bartenders since 2007, which were added to the economy. Since 2007, we have lost 1.4 million manufacturing jobs. And this tells us we have a major problem. But of course, the corporate media, the U.S. government tells us, no, we're no longer a manufacturing company, we're a service-oriented country. But we see at this point that the service area, which is following the manufacturing decline, it is all declining now. And the BLS admitted while employment in professional and business services increased by 73,000 in December, temporary help services accounted for nearly half, or 34,000 of the gain. Jumping the 34,000 jump in December brought the number of temp workers to a new all-time high. So yes, jobs grew, but the BLS admits that part of the 290,000 jobs, more than all came from one worker who had to work 2 or more jobs. So this number that we're looking at, the 290,000 that everyone's putting all over the corporate media and the U.S. government saying, haha, you see, is again completely fake, phony, and false. This number most likely is around 100,000, where everything else is most likely part-time. And people are working multiple jobs. Now, when we look at the auto industry, they're telling us that the auto industry is doing incredibly well. And we're learning now that the inventories of unsold motor vehicles are at their highest since August of 2008. So we're repeating what happened in 2007 going into 2008, and that is channel stuffing. We are seeing the same thing once again. The smoke and mirrors of credit-fueled malinvestment has hit a wall, and yet the automakers basically are continually producing the cars, and they're telling the dealers to take the cars. The last time automakers channel stuffed this much, Lehman and GM went bankrupt shortly after. We are heading down the same path. We are now getting some information about major retailers across the sector, and they are down. Because of what? Disappointing holiday season, same-store sales, and basically there's concern in the retail market. American Eagle Outfitters. Sales have plummeted. Gap is reporting negative same-store sales across its 3 brands, Gap Global, Old Navy, Banana Republic, and they're all terrible. Nordstrom is down. Macy's, as we know, their same-store sales were down by 4.7%. Kohl's, Coach, Tiffany & Company, Target, and many other stores are all reporting sales are down. So where are we headed here? We are headed into the abyss. We are headed into a major economic collapse. That means if the stores didn't do well this holiday season, like they're reporting right now, the final numbers are not out, but we're getting information that it is absolutely awful. That means they're going to be closing stores. That means they're going to be laying off people. That means this economy is imploding on itself. Wholesale sales collapsed by 1% month on month. This is the biggest drop in a year, leaving the spread between sales and inventories at a record high. This is the ugliest state of all. Inventory to sales spiked to 1.32. This is the highest since 2008 crisis. And what does this tell us? This is signaling a depression. When we look at the wholesale inventory to sales, we are approaching the height of the market when it collapsed in 2001 and in 2008. We are headed to the same area. Simply put, U.S. economy has utterly failed. We built it, we stuffed it, and nobody came to take it, to buy it, to purchase it. So now what? What happens now? Well, the Atlanta Fed is out there, and they looked at these incredible job numbers, and they say, okay, we're going to reduce GDP, our forecast. We're going to bring it down once again. We're going to bring it down to, 0.6% now. Well, if the job numbers were so great, why is their forecasting going the opposite way? Well, because when they look at all the other data, they see what's happening in the economy. And the Atlanta Fed is pretty good in forecasting. Of course, what happens later on, the U.S. government comes in, manipulates the numbers, throws Obamacare numbers in there, increases the inventories, brings that up, massages the GDP numbers, and all of a sudden they have a positive number. And if you strip all that junk out of it, like they used to, how they used to calculate the GDP would be in the negative right now. And we are seeing the stock market completely fall apart. I mean, the last 5 days have been horrific. Canadian stocks are down by 21%. The global market freakout of 2016 just got worse. And whatever we saw back in 2015 at the end of the year, starting in August, it is continuing into this year. Now, of course, they're going to blame a lot of other things. They always do. But the biggest thing is the economy, the number of people working. The Baltic Dry Index, which keeps dropping, it's down to 429. It dropped another 16 points. That is the raw material the factories use to create and to produce. And if there's no demand for this raw material, manufacturers are going to be declining, which we're seeing. If manufacturers are going to decline, we see products are not being shipped out to the store because there's no demand from the consumer. Consumers aren't shopping, and we see how all this is tied in. And this whole system right now is completely falling apart. It's collapsing, and it's going to accelerate. We are seeing it accelerate. There's no other way to look at this. And when we look at all this information and we cut through the U.S. government BS, we see the truth. We see what's really happening in this economy. I mean, if we looked back to 2008 and we looked at what was really going on there, of course it's easy to look back now, we would see it. We see it all. We see the lies. We see what they were telling us was completely untrue. The statistical information was completely untrue. But today it's a lot worse because now they have full control over everything. They manipulate everything. And what we're seeing right now is the economy, it's collapsing. It's falling apart. And we're getting closer and closer to the point where they're not going to be able to keep this up anymore. It's just going to fall apart and implode on itself. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.